It was the 1950s, a time when London still bore the scars of the war, but the streets were alive with the hum of recovery. I was new to the area, having recently moved into a small flat off St. Thomas Street. The cobbled streets, the fog, the sounds of distant voices, it all felt so foreign, yet strangely familiar. One evening, after work at the factory, I stumbled upon an old shop tucked between two much brighter buildings. The sign hanging above the door read, "Henderson's Fine Soaps," though I hadn't noticed it before. It looked almost forgotten, the wood weathered, the glass dirty. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside, its sound hollow and unsettling. The shop was dim, the air thick with dust, and the faint scent of something I couldn't place. Behind the counter there was an old man, Albert Henderson, I learned later, who didn't look up at first. When he did, there was something odd in his gaze, like he was expecting me. "You're new," he said, his voice quiet, like it hadn't been used in a while. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I've heard about your soaps," I said, trying to keep things casual. The idea of buying soap in such a strange old shop made me feel out of place, but I needed something for the grime from work. Albert stared at me for a long moment before finally speaking again. "This one's special," he murmured, sliding a bar of soap toward me. It was pure white, gleaming under the dim light, with an intricate pattern pressed into its surface. He didn't seem to notice my hesitation as he handed it to me. I didn't think much of it at the time. A bar of soap. It was just soap, right? I paid him the few pennies and left with the bar in my hand, the old man's strange eyes following me as I walked out. Later that night, in the small bathroom of my flat, I unwrapped the soap. It felt cold. Smooth, like any other soap. I expected it to be nothing special, but when I lathered it under the water, something felt off. The water around my hands turned a deep, oily black, swirling as if something beneath the surface was alive. I froze, staring at it. I tried to wash the soap off, but the more I scrubbed, the thicker it became. I could feel it in my skin. My fingers started tingling, my skin growing tight as if the soap was sinking into me. I turned to look in the mirror. My face, no, my entire reflection, blurred, twisted in a way that wasn't natural. I wiped my face, but when I looked at my fingers, they weren't wet. They were slick with something that wasn't water. It was like oil, black and sticky. I jumped back, heart pounding in my chest. I stared at my reflection, but it didn't seem like mine anymore. The lather from the soap had changed. It wasn't soap anymore. It was something else, something alive. I panicked. I scrubbed at my skin, desperate to wash it off, but it only spread. The blackness clung to me, seeped into my pores. It was in my veins, under my flesh. I couldn't get rid of it. It felt like it was growing inside me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it crawling on my skin, shifting beneath the surface, like 1,000 tiny creatures were moving under my flesh. The worst part was the silence. There was no noise outside, no movement from the city. I could feel the waiting, the heavy air pressing in on me. I could swear I wasn't alone in that flat anymore. Something was watching me. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back to the shop. I had to find answers. When I got to St. Thomas Street, the fog was thick, but the shop stood there just as it had before. I walked in, feeling the weight of dread settle in my chest. The bell didn't ring when I opened the door. It was wrong. Albert's shop was silent. No one was there. I stood at the counter, staring at the empty shelves. The soap I had bought, the soap that had changed me, was gone. There was only a small note left on the counter. "For the cleanest of souls, you must wash away all that is human." The words burned into my mind. I looked around again, but the shop was empty. Albert Henderson was nowhere to be found. I was alone. I ran out of the shop, desperate to escape, but I felt it then. The soap had marked me. It had consumed me. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window, and I swear I wasn't me anymore. The reflection was twisted, a dark version of myself that smiled back. The last thing I remember before I blacked out was the feeling of something crawling beneath my skin, something that wasn't mine. I never returned to St. Thomas Street. But sometimes, when I'm walking down the foggy streets, I feel it again. The cold, slick feeling of that soap. It never leaves me. I wonder if it's watching me still, waiting for the right moment to finish what it started.